Fading skeletal remains of buildings dot the Kansas countryside. These ghostly images speak of towns which once were. These now forgotten sites were the towns pioneers settled in the second half of the 1800s. Those towns sprung up across the plains like weeds in a garden, but only the strongest cities could survive. Desperation motivates citizens of one Kansas town to pick up and move to avoid creditors. Did it work? Another Kansas town fought with the Princess of the Prairie, Wichita, over the county seat, cattle drive, and railroad. And bullets were fired, the militia called in, and verbal assaults exchanged between towns. The state Supreme Court deciding a county seat war out west, resulting in the dissolution of a county and its towns. And thousands of settlers swelled Kansas southern border towns only to vacate those cities after a gun fired at high noon, leaving those communities to slowly fade away. These are just a few of the stories to be told as we explore the amazing world of Kansas Ghost Towns, Part 2.
This program is made possible in part by Humanities Kansas, whose mission is to connect communities with history, traditions, and ideas to strengthen civic life. And by viewers like you. Thank you for your support.
Pioneers settled Kansas in a general east to west movement. Railroads were granted land as a motivation to lay tracks across the plains, and those railroads formed towns along the way. One of those towns is north of Emporia in Lyon County, with the unusual name of Bushong. This was originally named Weeks, after Joseph Weeks, who platted the town and sold lots. But the name was changed to honor Al Doc Bushong, the baseball catcher for the St. Louis Browns. The Browns beat the Chicago White Stockings in the 1886 World Series. Well, towns took players' names to honor the winners. Bushong is the only one lasting this long. It's here we catch up with Dan Fitzgerald. The former Topeka, now Florida resident, has authored 6 ghost towns of Kansas books. We will hear his comments throughout the program. Old photos of Bushong show a busier time. Compare Main Street then to now. The Bushong Bank, chartered in 1916, shown here next to the hotel. The bank closed in 1932 during the Great Depression, but its limestone walls still stand along with the bank vault. But with the roof gone, well, nature begins to take over. The brick school has been around since 1918, with newer additions coming later. Classes haven't been held here since 1970. Like so many fading towns, school districts consolidated, with children being sent to schools elsewhere. This building functioned as a civic center before being abandoned. Towns like Bushong don't fall into the category of an extinct town. There are 27 residents from the 2020 census compared to 193 in the 1930 census. So by most standards, it's a ghost of its former self. Ulysses, Kansas, county seat of Grant County in southwest Kansas, a city of about 5,800. Certainly no ghost town, but it used to be. Few Kansas ghost towns illustrate the desperation and determination of Kansas pioneers to save their town as that of old Ulysses. That desperation illustrated in this display depicting how the town picked up its buildings and moved further west to where the present-day Ulysses is. This is the original town site for Ulysses. Now, it's thought of and called Old Ulysses. Out of desperation, citizens picked up and moved the whole town about 2 to 3 miles west of here to stay a step ahead of creditors. More on that momentarily. Ulysses was founded in June 1885. Within about 6 weeks, the Grant County Register was printing stories. In the typical hyperbole of the days of town promoting the booming of towns, the paper writes of Ulysses, "Everything is newness and bustle. There is now a bustling, prosperous young city, and all the country around is dotted with the settlements of locators." The paper states, surely no such town ever before sprang up. 2 weeks later, the paper writes, there are from 25 to 30 parties in Ulysses every day looking for claims and business locations. To learn more about the rise, fall, and rebirth of Ulysses, I visited the historic Adobe Museum in Ulysses, where Ginger Anthony is museum director. Anthony says George Earp, first cousin to the famous Dodge City lawman Wyatt Earp, was manager of the Ulysses Town Company. Earp platted the town.
He was the early mover and shaker of Old Ulysses. He was the mayor at one time. He was a postmaster. He built a Riverside Hotel.
George Earp was only 19 years old at the time and taking on a lot of responsibility. At age 21, he was elected mayor. Everything seemed to be coming up roses in the newborn town. Ulysses had 4 hotels, including Hotel Edwards, built in 1887. That same year, the Opera House was built. It later became the county courthouse. It's hard to imagine now, but back then, Ulysses could even boast of a natural lake.
Those were the wet years, if you will, a wet cycle, that there was water. And what we call the draw east of town, they called it a lake. They fished out of it.
The local paper boasted of a fine lake on the town's western edge. It's not there now, but back in 1885, it was a drawing card to settlers who arrived, evidently during an unusual wet period in this southwest Kansas region. Old Ulysses grew to about 1,500, supporting a lot of local businesses, hotels, banks, saloons, general stores, a bathhouse, barber shops. Ulysses was growing.
But, again, that was heyday, and they were expecting big things. Ulysses was going to be the Wichita of the West.
But to be the Wichita of the West, Ulysses sold bonds to raise money for infrastructure projects.
They actually sold bonds for streetcars for out here and, waterworks.
Ulysses wasn't really big enough to justify having streetcars, but the bonds were sold anyway. And the blessing of that easy money later became a curse when it became time to make bond payments with interest.
They had lots of dreams, but a lot of that kind of vanished with some of the early promoters.
Yes, and speaking of vanishing, Anthony says some of those early promoters started leaving town when the boom turned to a bust. Grant says one of the town's early promoters years later admitted in a book that he left Ulysses with his pockets lined with money.
But he said, I left with my pockets lined.
Ulysses residents were left with the bill on bonds meant for town improvements. Instead, the money was spent on buying county seat votes. Ulysses prospered for several years, but by 1909, Kansas's fickle weather cycle started taking a costly toll on old Ulysses.
It was a dry period. They couldn't raise crops. Businesses were failing. People were leaving southwest Kansas, moving back east again.
The bonds town promoters and local leaders took out years earlier came due. But the promoters and many original settlers foresaw trouble coming and left town. That left a much smaller population base holding the debt without much ability to pay the bonds off. Anthony says the town's population dropped from a high of 1,500 to only 40.
It was just impossible. They just knew there was no way that that could ever be paid back.
Bondholders were breathing down their backs. Residents couldn't pay the interest or the principal on the bonds. Citizens figured creditors would take possession of all the town's buildings for payment. So the few remaining residents took the only action they thought they could at the time to save themselves: pick up the town and move it further west.
They did what they had to do.
Nowadays, it wouldn't have worked, but for some reason, those bonds were tied to that particular parcel.
They used great teams of horses to move the buildings. They used wagons, skids, block and tackle systems to move them. That included Hotel Edwards. It is written it took 60 horses to move each section of the hotel to its new site. The hotel was cut up into 3 sections for the roughly 3-mile move. One of those sections is here at the historic Adobe Museum. It has been restored to look like it did in the late 1800s.
This is the center portion of the building, and then the 2 wings or the 2 sections that were cut off. One was moved to Satanta, we think, and maybe was a boarding house, and the other was scrapped out for lumber to be used on a farmstead. But small, no-frills rooms, as you can see.
This Hotel Edwards shows museum visitors what elegant hotel settings were available to those old-time Ulysses visitors arriving here in the late 1800s to do business or to scout out a homestead. One of the oldest buildings in Grant County was back then the residence of Judge William Hutchinson. The house, built in 1885, was moved to New Ulysses. And here it is, still occupied now, with mature trees around it. So, remnants of old Ulysses live on to this day. Ulysses survived by moving from the town site the bonds were evidently tied to and forming a new town they named New Ulysses. The town has ridden boom and bust cycles over the past century. The town eventually dropped New from its name. But those who know the history will remember there was an old Ulysses town site, memorialized here as one of the more interesting stories of a Kansas ghost town. There are a couple of towns catching my attention in southern Dickinson County. Being PBS Kansas, it's hard not to notice Elmo, with the town sign resembling the Sesame Street character of the same name. You can drive right past Elmo on Highway K-15 and not notice it at the highway junction with K-4.
My husband and I put that up there because the KDOT took the signs down on the highway, and we wanted people to know that they were in Elmo.
Elmo resident Linda Donnelly says there are only 9 houses remaining in Elmo, and only 1 is not occupied. She says this community once supported several businesses serving the rural farm area.
It used to be their bank, or the lumber yard, grocery store. The circus used to come to town, 2 or 3 stations in town. It was before my time.
It seemed like every town had a main street. Well, Elmo was no different. But there isn't much evidence left to pick out where those former businesses Donnelly spoke of were located. Nature is trying to reclaim the ground where old sidewalks remain. These walkways led pedestrians to former storefronts, but what once was here is gone. Trees are taking over town lots, which likely housed the bank, the grocery, gasoline filling stations, and the like.
Isn't it hard to imagine that that was all here one day and now it's gone?
Elmo is a town that my family settled near, so it's one that's near and dear to my heart.
Amy Bickle has written about Kansas ghost towns for years, authoring the book Dead Towns of Central and Western Kansas.
Elmo was born actually not far from its current location it missed the railroad, but it had a post office. The entire town moved to what was called Banner City at the time.
But there were already other Kansas towns named Banner City, so they changed the name here to Elmo.
Elmo has a claim to fame among paleontologists, scientists, that has the largest quantity of prehistoric insect fossils in the world. So there's just weird, quirky history in all our Kansas towns.
We still have a Catholic church that's very active.
And because the church is active and maintained, it stands while other structures crumble and fade away.
It's not active anymore. It's a farming community. We call it a small community.
Now, just a few miles west of Elmo is Carlton, another fading town. Carlton, settled in 1886, was on the Chisholm Trail route to Abilene and the Missouri Pacific Railroad. Carlton had 40 residents in the 2020 census, down from 138 in the 1930 census. An active grain elevator still serves the farm community from here. Carlton saw a lot of construction traffic back in the 1960s when this Atlas missile silo nearby was being constructed. A nuclear-tipped missile was just down the road, ready to be launched in the nation's defense. But those Atlas missiles were decommissioned, declared obsolete, soon after they went online. So the activity of Air Force personnel coming and going at the silo near Carlton soon faded away. Historic photos show a once active Main Street with a general merchandise store and more. Some of those former retail store sites remain, though empty. Another century or more old photo shows cars lining Main Street with town lots occupied. It's a stark contrast to a more current aerial view. The Presbyterian Church served Carlton for many years, but the years have taken a toll on this former house of worship also. And no matter how small some towns get compared to their past, some still don't like being called a ghost town.
It's not a ghost town. I'm here.
Still to come, how Wichita had to fight to keep from becoming a ghost town against a now extinct town. And have you ever wondered why Finney County has that nose shape to it? Sumner County has its share of ghost towns with some storied past to tell, yet to come. The thing about Kansas ghost towns is that we could be right in their midst and not even know it. Right now, I'm surrounded by the city of Wichita. Yet, in this location, about a century ago, was the town of Manchester, also known as Minnehaha. This pathway between Rock and Webb Roads is now known as the Redbud Trail. Bicyclists, joggers, and hikers use this trail, But in the 1800s, the St. Louis-San Francisco Railway, also known as the Frisco, operated trains on this line. In 1887, Manchester was founded and a post office opened here. Old maps show the Manchester train station on this line between present-day Rock and Webb Roads. This Manchester article in the April 14, 1887 Wichita Daily Eagle said, 6 miles east of Wichita, on the Frisco Railroad, lies the beautiful town site of Manchester. No better location for a suburban town can be found around us. 2 weeks later, this special notice in the Eagle stated, the Manchester Town Company erecting a storeroom at Manchester, 6 miles east of this city, Wichita, for general merchandising. Well, Manchester's name was changed to Minnehaha in 1889. Newspaper notices referred to Minnehaha Township meetings. This area is still known as the Minnehaha Township. The Manchester Minnehaha Town founders hoped to capitalize on the growth of Wichita, but it was Wichita's growth that eventually overtook the location.
Minnehaha, for example, in the Wichita area now, well, part of Wichita, it's an example of a town that grew up, that could offer business opportunities to people near Wichita. It's feeding off the primary town, and they actually did very well for a while as transportation became more efficient. People could drive to Wichita to get their groceries, their clothing, whatever it is they needed. They didn't need those towns any longer, especially if they're really close to the main town.
Minnehaha's incorporation was dissolved in the 1930s. What was the Manchester Minnehaha town site is now surrounded by housing and retail stores. So, town founders were right about it being a good location, just not as its own town. When it comes to Kansas ghost towns, there are few, if any, that capture the attention and imaginations of ghost town hunters like Ravenna. The location of Ravenna is in present-day northeast Finney County. When it comes to exploring and talking about Ravenna, I include the ghost town Eminence in the conversation because the two towns are tightly linked through their county seat battles. There are few town remains at the former Eminence site. Ravenna's location, however, has ruins of the former town. These ruins, a reason why the town's history is so captivating. The courthouse and the schoolhouse stand out. Rubble from other buildings remain, but is less visible. Pioneer settlers started moving to the region in the late 1870s. Many resided in dugouts and sod-built homes called soddies until frame houses were built. The town was first called Mason, with a post office established in 1879. It was renamed Bulltown after John Bull, who was a town founder and owner of the John Bull & Company General Store, a store seen in many historic photos and newspaper advertisements of the era. But the residents didn't like the Bulltown name. They tried Cowtown. They didn't like that either. They settled on Ravenna, which, the funny thing, was meant to be Ravenna with an E, but was misspelled on official papers and, oh well, Ravenna it stayed.
There were, at one time, quite a few settlers there.
Lori Oshel is research librarian and assistant director of the Finney County Historical Museum. She's confident about knowing why settlers came here.
My speculation is land. They could come homestead.
Much of eastern and central Kansas land had already been homesteaded, so later arriving settlers needed to move westward, where the government was offering free land through the Homestead Act of 1862.
Fight over the county seat while people scattered, it built up and then it scattered.
Tom Reed is a descendant of generations of Reeds living and ranching in the Ravenna area since the late 1800s, when this was Garfield County. Reed says the lack of two things kept Garfield County, Ravenna, and Eminence from succeeding.
There's a lack of money and a lack of water out here. A lot of people come out to Homestead, they couldn't get a well on their, like Buffalo Center couldn't get a well, there wasn't no water out here everywhere.
And a lot of them really didn't know what they were getting themselves into because it wasn't like farming back east.
Like she says, newly arriving homesteaders didn't know what to expect of the land here. There wasn't a lot known about it then. Pioneers also didn't know what to expect of the weather. There weren't weather records for the region back then. You look at the land now and find small cacti plants and very short grass. There were no trees to be found here at the time, and few even now. Still, hundreds arrived to what now may appear to many a barren landscape, and they managed to scratch out a living, at least for a while.
They had high hopes, they had big things planned, and they had quite a few businesses. There's a photo here that shows some of the businesses on July 4th.
The 1888 photo of Ravenna's Main Street shows hotels, banks, blacksmiths, stables, and more. There were newspaper ads for dentists, a physician and surgeon, and attorneys. And of course, you could always find ads for the John Bull and Company General Store, which sold a wide range of goods. Folks in Ravenna thought they had it made and were on cloud nine when the governor granted Ravenna the Garfield County seat. The July 21st, 1887 Ravenna Chieftain newspaper headline reads, "The governor's proclamation issued, Ravenna the county seat." The paper's front page encouraged residents to ring the bells, fire the guns, and fling the starry banner out. "Now we will boom as never boomed before," the story read. So there were widespread celebrations. Ravennans thought nothing could stop them now. Folks in Ravenna were just so sure that once they got the county seat, nothing could strip it away. So they built this courthouse at a cost of more than $10,000, which was a lot of money back then.
That was a lot of money back then, and then it run over cost. They said they had to put $2,000 more in it to get it finished, and then I'm not sure if it was quite finished then. But
despite Ravenna's investment in this courthouse, a county-wide election was called to decide whether Ravenna would remain county seat. The stories of the Ravenna courthouse, the county seat elections, voter fraud, ballot box stuffing, court fights, and gunfights are legend. So much time has passed that the validity of all those stories can't be verified. But Reed remembers stories passed down about ballot stuffing in Ravenna that the state Supreme Court ruled on.
and there's one guy said he'd voted 8 times and they'd give him $1 every time he voted, so they throwed out enough votes on that county seat election that then Eminence got the election.
Population estimates for both towns range from a few hundred to a couple thousand. The high-end estimates are likely exaggerated by town promoters booming those towns.
Each town had 300 or 400 inhabitants, but over 1,000 votes were cast.
The collection of more votes than there were legal voters happened on a regular basis on county seat elections in Kansas. The Garfield County Call newspaper reported the county seat election of November 8, 1887 resulted in the selection of Ravenna by 40 votes over Eminence, further saying there was no trouble. But that was before a further investigation into the voting. In some Kansas County seat fights, violence resulted to the point of injuries and fatalities. Folks in Garfield County hoped they could avoid a massacre like what happened when the towns of Leota and Coronado fought.
Leota and Coronado was one of the bloody county seat wars. Hugoton and Woodsdale was another bloody county seat war where people were murdered because they wanted the town. And I think to me, it comes down to politics and greed.
The one-word headline read, "Murder," after 7 Leota citizens were shot, resulting in 6 deaths during the county seat battle in Wichita County. The Ravenna newspaper here printed the story of that carnage. That is said to have been one of the bloodiest county seat battles in the American West. Leota remained the county seat, and Coronado became another extinct ghost town.
So the Eminence folks protested, went to the Supreme Court of Kansas. They overturned it, had a recount, and I think it was Eminence by like 35 or 37 votes, something like that.
It took nearly 2 years before the Kansas Supreme Court ruled there was voter fraud in Ravenna, citing that the ballot box had been stuffed with at least 86 illegal votes. Yet, even the court's ruling in favor of Eminence didn't settle the matter to those in Ravenna.
They kept fighting over the county seat.
And those fights involved exchanges of gunfire.
Ravenna wouldn't give up the records in the courthouse, so
One story printed said, "Eminence parties came down last Saturday prepared to move the treasurer's office over to Eminence. But their better judgment prevailed, and they gave it up and returned home wiser, if not better men. The county records, with the exceptions of the district clerk's records, will be kept at Ravenna. Bluffing and bulldozing games have become old and stale."
that started a fight, so Eminence come over one night after dark.
Reed says Eminence residents caused the disturbance with guns firing south of Ravenna. That, he says, drew Ravenna residents away from town. With that distraction, other Eminence people then raided the Ravenna courthouse.
And that's when they absconded with the courthouse records in the middle of the night.
That still didn't settle the strife between the towns.
It did get ugly, but luckily no one was killed.
And county seat wars were very colorful and sometimes violent. And that one, I think, was doubly interesting because we don't have Garfield County anymore. They went through who knows how much money in building these beautiful buildings, only to find out that Garfield County wasn't big enough to be a county in the first place. So everybody lost.
It is said that several deputies from Dodge City came in to try to keep the peace.
Well, I think finally the state militia was called out because there were threats of violence. I think there were some fisticuffs in the beginning, and it kind of escalated from there.
Stories say lawman Bat Masterson was amongst them, but Masterson is quoted in a book saying he never went to Ravenna.
I noticed that Bat Masterson and Wyatt Earp ended up in lots of towns, and historians would look back and say, well, there's no way they could have been in that town at that time.
It's just part of the lore that makes Ravenna such an interesting Kansas ghost town to research. Folks in Ravenna took the attitude that if Ravenna wasn't going to be the county seat, then no other town would be either. Ravenna citizens suggested that Garfield County wasn't large enough to meet state requirements to be a county. So a new land survey was made, and sure enough, lawmakers said Garfield lacked the necessary land area.
They thought if they couldn't win, no one would. And they alerted the state, Attorney General John Ives, and basically said Garfield was too small to be a true county.
It's like, well, if we can't have it, then we're going to make it where you can't be the county seat either, because they knew that it was too small to be an official county.
So Garfield County was annexed into Finney County in 1893. Older state county maps shows Garfield with the GA initials, but this 1893 map removed Garfield. That's why Finney County has the lazy L shape to it. That northeast portion used to be Garfield County. The loss of the county struck a blow to Ravenna, Eminence, and other Garfield towns. Ravenna and Eminence struggled in the following decades with their populations declining. Eminence was located 7 to 8 miles due west of Ravenna, but you'll have to struggle to find many signs that the town was ever here. That's partly because most Eminence buildings were made of wood. As the town declined, wood-constructed buildings were moved to other locations. The Eminence Hotel, for example, shown here, was relocated to a nearby ranch. Wood was scarce, so other buildings got dismantled and the wood repurposed. One building that does remain is the Eminence Schoolhouse. That's because it was built with limestones. It couldn't be moved. It is still in use as a farm storage building. The Eminence Cemetery, with an 1887 date, remains west of the town site. Many of the inferior grave markers have crumbled. Other markers remain. The cemetery seems like a lonely reminder that a thriving community was once here. It is surrounded by farm fields, but no houses. And like the residents in the cemetery, Eminence is dead. Now, if the Pawnee River, which ran through the town, provided water then, it doesn't now. Not a drop. The Garden City newspapers of the day told stories with the catchphrase headline, "The boom busted."
Newspaper said the boom busted, and a lot of those people who were here moved either farther west or back east to home.
The Ravenna location is easier to find because of its limestone structures. The Ravenna School held classes here. Tom Reed says his older brother Guy was in the last class taught here in 1930-31 school year.
Well, my brother Guy Reed went to the first grade there, and then they quit the school. That was probably in about 1930.
The remaining schoolhouse rubble doesn't give a proper perspective on the school's original size.
I'm not just sure exactly what date they built this school, but it was a two-story school, but they never did finish the upper part of it. They had dances in there, and they had literaries, had all kind of stuff up in the upstairs of it after they quit having school.
Old-time photos like this one of the school in 1889, though fuzzy in focus and in poor shape, shows us its size. Reed says years later, a local rancher bought the schoolhouse and property.
John Bryant bought that ranch, and he took the roof and the wood out of the second floor and took it 4 miles north and built a bunkhouse out of it and built a barn out of it.
This photo shows the rancher then used the schoolhouse as a corral to load out cattle. With the roof and second floor removed, it was just a matter of time before the walls started crumbling and collapsing. Photos show that some of the other wood structures in the town lasted decades, though obviously showing decay.
This is the Ravenna Hotel, the former Ravenna Hotel. And I think it's obviously from the 30s, judging by the car 30s or 40s.
Over the decades, people have visited the Ravenna site for photo shoots at the courthouse and the school building. But over the years, scavengers have raided the sites, taking anything memorable away, including the window bars. What's left here are stones, once with squared, sharp-chiseled edges to neatly fit into place. Now, age and erosion have rounded them off. But Reed managed to make what, to him, is a valuable and memorable find from an estate sale. The welded-together contraption in his yard of antique steel tractor wheels, seats, and other such things also includes an important part of the old Ravenna schoolhouse.
This is a Ravenna school bells project I made. I haven't quite got it done. I had a teeter-totter here I was making, and I kind of got to where I couldn't see to weld, so I just kind of stopped. But I started to try to display the old Ravenna school bell.
And the bell, which once summoned students to school, hasn't been called upon for its original purpose for more than 90 years. And though the sounds of teachers instructing and students learning their lessons here are well in the past, Reed can sound the bell as if this ghost town still had life in it. In the late 1800s, it was common for town promoters to lie, cheat, and even resort to threats and occasionally violence to try to boom their town. Still to come, how such tactics played into the earliest days of Wichita's growth. Also, town promoters thought their new town had the perfect location to be county seat, only to see their town disappear. And rowdy cowboys got drunk and shot up Kansas towns after coming off the trail. Just a few of the stories coming up. Sumner County gets a lot of traffic because the Kansas Turnpike cuts a path through it. But long before turnpikes and highways were paved, Sumner County got traffic from the Chisholm Trail. Sumner County, on the state's south-central border, has its share of ghost towns. There are little to no visual traces to some of the extinct towns, like the former Sumner City. Other ghost towns continue to fade, having a few residents, buildings, and streets, but are a ghostly semblance of what they once were. The Kansas Historical Society lists 100 post offices in Sumner County since the first one opened January 11, 1871 in Sumner City. It lasted just over a year and a half. Not all of these post offices were in incorporated towns, but they illustrate the many areas of county settlements since the 1870s. Sumner County's highest population was the 1910 census at 30,654, which is more than 8,000 above the 2020 census. Some Kansas ghost towns stand out above others.
Sumner City to me is the essential ghost town that's no longer there. You're not going to find it, and it only lasted for a couple of years, so that one's completely gone.
Jim Bells is a physical therapist by occupation. Bells also describes himself as an amateur historian of Sumner County, working and doing research at the Chisholm Trail Museum in Wellington. Bells points to a map of the old Chisholm Trail as the trail enters from Oklahoma into Kansas near the Sumner County town of Caldwell.
And then as it goes north, you'll see Sumner City was right here, and the trail was about a mile and a quarter west of Sumner City.
You won't find remains to Sumner City here at its former location, which is now a pasture near Slate Creek.
Sumner City is, to me, is very fascinating because it played a part in the founding of Wellington.
Bells and Carrie Cook drew what they believe was the town's street layout in 1871, with the businesses located around the town square. Advertisements in the town's newspaper, the Sumner City Gazette, tell of the businesses located in Sumner City. Those include a lumber yard, hotel, builders, surveyors, saloon on the west side of the public square, a blacksmith shop, and more.
Sumner City was started out actually as a way station ranch called the Caddo de Gola Ranch.
Bells says that way station was along what became known as the Chisholm Trail.
People would travel this trail north and south, going into Indian territories or down to Texas. And if you stopped at the DeGola Ranch, you could trade out your horses, get a meal, buy some ammunition or some other supplies that you needed before you headed south.
There are those who saw this way station location as a potential city and county seat for the new Sumner County.
Then they thought that Sumner City would be the ideal location for the Sumner County seat because it was centrally located in what was to be Sumner County.
That, he says, was about the year 1870, when so many other Kansas towns were being formed, including Wichita.
There was a big fight for the Sumner County seat. Wellington, Oxford, Belle Plaine, even Caldwell was in the running.
The Sumner City Gazette regularly printed its publishers' reasons for why the county seat should be located at Sumner City. Number one, on account of the geographical position being exactly in the center of the county. 2 days later, the paper printed, Sumner City, with its central location, there can be no doubt of it being the permanent county seat. At least that's what they thought. Bales says the Sumner City location caught the attention of Wichita investors who formed a town company and laid out city streets and had town buildings constructed.
So these investors came down, but the sad fact is they just didn't really support the town. They got it started, but then they kind of backed up. And the people that were left to actually build the buildings and start the town, they put in the sweat equity and they weren't getting a return on their investment. And so they got very upset with the investors from Wichita.
Promoters of the new town of Wellington were able to take advantage of that frustration. Bales says Wellington leaders lured Sumner City businesses to relocate their buildings to Wellington by offering them free lots on Main Street and help them move the several miles east.
Well, that was a deal that a lot of them couldn't afford to pass up, so about half the businesses actually did that. And that gave Wellington an instant growth, which actually helped them cement the Sumner County seat.
There's also a story, true or not, it's hard to tell now, saying that Wellington men changed the Chisholm Trail pathway. It's said that they plowed a furrow somewhere here along the Chisholm Trail towards Wellington and away from Sumner City. Wellington got the trail business, and Sumner City soon died, along with any hopes of being the county seat. Sumner City soon disappeared from county maps, and its former site leaves nothing of the town to be found. Not all Kansas ghost towns are extinct, like Sumner City. On the Kansas-Oklahoma border in Sumner County is Honeywell.
Honeywell is interesting in many facets. First and foremost, it was a cattle town, and it originated as a cattle town.
You could say Honeywell is one of those slowly fading towns. The 2020 census lists Honeywell's population at 44. That's a 34% drop since 2010. And not even 20% of the town's population of 233 in 1900. Honeywell is named after Boston financier and railroad owner H.H. Honeywell. The town was purposely established on the Kansas side of the border with Oklahoma, when Oklahoma was Indian Territory. By the time Honeywell was founded in 1880, the Texas cattle drives had moved west to Dodge City. Kansas homesteading farmers had put up fences on their farms. The cattle drives along the Chisholm Trail were no longer welcome and forbidden by law in 1885. Earlier, those cattle drives passed by Caldwell to the west of Honeywell. With the cattle drives ending in central Kansas, some border towns turned to the railroads and became shipping points for cattle to go by rail to Kansas City and Chicago. The town of Caldwell was one of those. Bell says railroad baron Honeywell saw an opportunity to cash in on the cattle trade by paying for an extension of the rail line to a new border town in his name.
A financier by the name of H.H. Honeywell bankrolled a string or a rail coming off that southern Kansas road called the Sumner County Railway, and it went straight to Honeywell. And he basically bankrolled the whole town. There wasn't a town there to begin with.
Bell says once Mr. Honeywell decided a town should be built here, it went up quickly. The businesses Honeywell established were to serve the expected influx of cowboys and railroad workers.
Of course, the railroad came in there and invested all that money, and I think the railroad made it there. The hotel was built all within a bank, 2 saloons. All of those buildings were put up within a 3-month time frame.
That was in 1880. Town founder Honeywell had the money and know-how to build a town and hire people to run it.
He hired the people to build the hotel. He hired the people to build the stockyards. He set up the rail area where they could load the cattle. He actually hired the police, marshals, all the governing body at first to get the town organized. And so he was trying to get that cattle trade to come in.
H.H. Honeywell's investment turned this town into one of the leading railroad shipping centers for the cattle trade at the time. And it wasn't all Texas cattle trade. Ranchers were leasing land to graze cattle on from Native American tribes in the Cherokee Strip of present-day Oklahoma. That included the famed Miller brothers, who had the massive 101 cattle ranch in Oklahoma. Today, aerial views show what's left of the layout of the streets. The city blocks are mostly empty. There are no signs of the former stockyards. The railroad remains, serving the Honeywell elevator. But little else remains from the days when rowdy cowboys dominated the town. This is one of the old buildings that remains when Honeywell was a bustling cow town. It was Honeywell's post office. In later years, it served as City Hall. Honeywell's post office opened in 1880 and closed in 1960. Across the street from the old post office, and 140 years earlier, was the location of the hotel. Now, there are barely remains of old sidewalks here. The town back then grew quickly to serve the rail stop and stockyards businesses. In its heyday, Honeywell could boast of a couple of general stores, a bank, a barber shop, 2 dance halls, and 8 saloons for the thirsty cowboys and rail workers. The town had other businesses and services also to meet local needs. Those cowboys could get pretty rowdy during the cattle roundup times.
There was one gunfight that happened in 1884.
The Caldwell Journal newspaper told the gunfight story with the headline, "Trouble at Honeywell." The story goes, several of the boys came into Honeywell and proceeded to get on a hurrah. After doing the town for a short time, they started out discharging their 6-shooters within the city limits and were followed by the marshals, who shot after them several times. The story implies the cowboys left town then. But later, 3 came back in the evening, and about 12 o'clock began making noisy demonstrations in Pat Hanley's saloon. The marshals tried to quiet them. As the marshals got outside the saloon, 2 boys fired at them. A cowboy named Clem Barfoot was also shot, and the Caldwell newspaper reports that Barfoot died after riding back into Oklahoma. Further details of this infamous gunfight can be found on a Wikipedia page.
It was rough and tough. Not, I won't say as bad as Caldwell, but pretty close. I mean, there was, like I said, the law there was the railroad.
Back then, cowboys were notorious for coming off the trail or a cattle roundup and getting wild in town once work was done. That included indiscriminately firing their guns into the air or into the walls at the hotel.
When they got to the Kansas Territory after being on the trail or rounding up all those cattle, they would let loose a little steam and shoot their guns off in the air. And back then they called it taking the town, and they'd shoot their guns in the air. And I think when they tore the hotel down, they had 72 pounds or something of lead embedded in the walls of the hotel.
There were other wild and crazy cowboy stories connected to that old Honeywell hotel.
There's one other story, newspaper story that of a cowboy that got drunk, and he rode his horse in the hotel up to the 3rd floor through the stairwell. So they partied.
Honeywell of the early 1890s was also one of those border towns which swelled in population in the lead up to the Oklahoma Cherokee Strip Run. The U.S. government set 12 o'clock noon, September 16, 1893, for the opening of the Cherokee Outlet to homesteaders. Honeywell was one of those Kansas border towns with a land office where hopeful Oklahoma settlers would apply for a land claim.
And in just a snap of a finger, Honeywell went from nothing to about 3,000 or 4,000 people based on this temporary need that existed for them.
There are still a few structures in Honeywell from those earlier times.
It's one of the oldest churches here.
Brittany Spencer lives in what was the Methodist Church here. She shows a newspaper photograph of the Honeywell Methodist Church's dedication in 1898.
I live in a historical landmark of Honeywell for sure. It's one of the last remaining churches in Honeywell. There's no other churches here.
The cowboys, the saloons, and hotel that cater to them are long gone. Their stories remain to be retold in a production as this. Now, up the rail line from Honeywell is another fading Sumner County ghost town named Rome. It's 10 miles north of Honeywell and 7 miles south of Wellington. The town was named after Rome, Italy by the landowner where the town was located and platted. Records indicate a post office opened here in 1874. 6 years later, in 1880, the Sumner County Railroad Company laid tracks through Rome connecting to Wellington and Honeywell. The railroad was a lifeline to the town, moving freight and passengers. However, it wasn't until 1884 that a town company organized and the town site laid out. Richard Thur has a grain and livestock operation just west of town and is a bit of a town historian, having grown up here.
In my time, the main attraction was the school, of course, on the south side of the street. It was two buildings that moved together for a two-room school.
The two-room school had 1st through 8th grades. Across the street was Billy's General Store and gas station. It was also a meeting spot for Rome residents.
And that's where the families would come to wait for the schools to get out at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, or they would loiter there during the day, maybe buy a few supplies.
The Co-op grain elevator is perhaps the busiest thing in Rome and still ships out grain by rail. North of it, and many years before, Rome had another grain elevator constructed of wood. It's since been torn down.
My dad worked at the north elevator because that's where you brought your cream and eggs in on Saturday night to trade out for merchandise or cash or whatever. And so he worked there as a late teenager.
Rome has had general stores, blacksmith shops, a lumber yard, auto repair shop, and a stockyard to serve the area. But as times changed, Kansans found fewer opportunities in smaller rural communities. So towns like Rome slowly fade to become one of the thousands of Kansas ghost towns. There are so many Kansas ghost towns that you could be driving down a country road like this one in Sumner County and drive right past the ghost town of Adamsville and miss it. Adamsville is about 4 miles north of Gouda Springs. Adamsville is one of numerous towns started by the railroad. This newspaper story with the headline, "Midland Starts New Towns," says there will be 5 towns with stations on the Midland Valley Railway between Wichita and Arkansas City. Adamsville was one of them. You can still see where the rail line passed through the town. But even being on a rail line wasn't enough to keep this town alive. A post office was opened here in 1925, but closed in 1931. Some of the buildings appear to be former retail merchant stores. But as with other towns we've seen, nature is working to hide under the canopy of trees this Kansas ghost town. Wichita had the county seat, the Texas cattle drive, and would soon get a railroad. But another Sedgwick County city was determined to wrestle all those away from Wichita. And another Kansas ghost town still stands out because of its trees. The story's coming up. Some ghost towns leave plenty of markings behind of their former existence. Those may be fallen down buildings, foundations, streets, and sidewalks. Other ghost towns left no trail for anyone to observe. Park City in Sedgwick County is one of the latter. Now, first off, I have to say, not this Park City. The present-day Park City just north of Wichita is no ghost town. Present-day Park City has more than 8,300 residents. But even this Park City's name is reportedly inspired by the earlier ghost town, Park City. We can't say much about Park City without talking about its archenemy, Wichita. The founders of Park City wanted to bury early-day Wichita after taking everything Wichita had. Wichita incorporated as a city in July of 1870, about the same time Park City, 12 miles to the north, was getting organized. Sedgwick County maps of the 1870s period show Park City's location. The town was about 5 miles due west of Valley Center. That places the town site on the north side of 77th Street North, near Mays Road, and just east of the Arkansas River. Somewhere in this farm field is where Park City was located. No visible evidence remains here since the town dissolved about 150 years ago. Before it was Park City, the town and its post office were called Cosmosa for a short time. But at least a couple of Park City's town buildings survived.
It did come from Park City.
Old accounts say Park City buildings were moved to Wichita, Hutchinson, and Newton after the town collapsed.
This building right here we've determined that is this building that we're in right now.
This former Park City building is getting an extended life in the town of Sedgwick as an historical museum.
It was moved here in about the 1880s from the original Park City town site.
That would have been about an 8-mile move across open field back then. It was common to preserve and move buildings when a town folded. The buildings got second lives in new towns, in this case, Sedgwick. The museum building on Sedgwick's Commercial Street stands out in contrast to the later built structures on the block. But in the 1880s, its arrival here would have fit in when hitching posts for horses like this one were common.
Kansas State Historical Society had told us a few years ago that we are this is one of the only ones they knew about that was still standing as a frame building anywhere in the state in this condition.
Nancy Stahl's great-great-grandfather settled in the Park City area back in the 1870s era when pioneers were homesteading Sedgwick County. Stahl says her relatives in that era were part of the Park City Town Company and would likely have held company share certificates like this.
The likelihood of them being in this and walking in this building over 152 years ago or 153 years ago makes me feel like I have a connection to this building.
For most of the building's second life, it was used as a physician's office. Visitors here can see how a doctor's office was equipped around the turn of the 20th century. It was a time when having a local town physician was critical. Now, medical professionals are clustered in larger cities. But in Old Park City, this was no doctor's office. It was a dram shop, which is just a politer name for a saloon.
It was nicer for the nice ladies, the well-educated ladies that lived there, and they would not appreciate having a saloon there.
Sedgwick's Historical Museum also has the only known existing photograph of Park City.
You know, the State Historical Society.
Perhaps the best-known expert on Park City is Sandra Wickert. Wickert is a Wichita native who lives in Lawrence. Wickert wrote her master's thesis on Park City, how it lived and why it died in 1966. She sums up the collective attitude of Park City's leaders back then.
They were very jealous.
Jealous enough, she says, that Park City leaders would stoop to underhanded tactics to try to steal what Wichita had, including the county seat, the Texas cattle drive, and railroad connection.
And then there would be battles over the county seats, and they were usually pretty rugged and oftentimes pretty mean. This was very definitely true with Sedgwick County and Park City and Wichita. And a lot was written on these county seat wars.
Park City was often written about in newspapers of the day. Park City's town company regularly had this ad in the Kansas Daily Commonwealth newspaper in Topeka. It boasted of cheap but valuable homes there, saying there were 1,000 lots available In the fine print, the ad predicts Park City has just started and is destined to be the great railroad and commercial center of southern Kansas. Park City's town company founders regularly got their stories in the Kansas Daily Commonwealth based in Topeka. They wrote that 2 or more railroads will speedily find their way to Park City. Those never came. It was common for town leaders and their promoters to write to local newspapers back then, including the Wichita City Eagle, telling glowing but often exaggerated stories about how well their town was prospering and what they were about to do. But often little to none of it was true.
Instead of building themselves up realistically, they would call the people of Wichita the liars, the bugaboos. They were not telling the truth. Don't pay any attention to those old folks down there. They don't know what they're saying. They're not good to deal with. They're mean.
A newspaper wrote, quote, "There appears to be considerable rivalry existing between these two places, Park City and Wichita, in regard to the county seat," end of quote. Park City accused Wichita of voter fraud in the election for the county seat.
Or else they would talk about a very successful election. 1,000 votes were cast, and we are the county seat. And then it would turn out that only, say, 200 people lived in the area.
In at least one county seat vote, it was found that names on the ballots included names of pets and cattle, besides names of dead relatives. It is generally thought that some of the earliest voting records got thrown into the river. Historians have searched for, but haven't found the actual voting records from 1870 and 1871. And then there were cattle drive battles. Getting the cattle drives to come through Wichita on their way to Abilene was an early jump start for the Wichita economy. And that was something Park City was jealous of and wanted for itself.
Then they would find out that Park City was trying desperately to tell, going down the trail and telling the drovers that no, Wichita was closed, everyone had to come to Park City. And they almost got away with it.
And this is where the story of the Four Horsemen of Wichita comes in. The story is illustrated in this mural now hanging in the Fidelity Bank offices in the former Carnegie Library in downtown Wichita. Texas cattle were being driven to Abilene stockyards and railhead in the early 1870s. The trail came through Wichita. Wichita merchants prospered from the trade as well as Delano's saloons and red light district. Park City's scheme included planting false stories in Topeka's Daily Commonwealth paper saying, quote, "We are informed that the cattle trail has been permanently located through Park City, Sedgwick County." Park City then sent their representative, a Major Henry Shanklin, down the cattle trail. Shanklin intercepted the cattle drovers and told them Wichita was no longer accepting Texas cattle, but Park City is. Shanklin bribed the cattle drovers with whiskey and money. Word got back to Wichita of this treachery.
Somehow, James R. Meade and the others heard that this was happening.
4 Wichita leaders, including Wichita co-founder James R. Meade, mounted horses and rode as quickly as they could to catch up with the now off-course cattle drovers. To make a long story short, the Four Horsemen informed the drovers Wichita wasn't closed, but instead open for cattle drives. And to further convince the bosses to turn their cattle towards Wichita, the Wichitans had bribes of their own. And as the mural shows, they shook hands, sealing the deal. Wichita's cattle trade was saved. Wichita set aside money to pay for cattle drive damages to local property and to pay for cattle losses while fording the river here. Those were things Park City wasn't prepared for, says Wickert.
Park City they never had the funds for that, and they never said that they would provide for it.
Meade wrote this letter to the Daily Commonwealth in Topeka in June of 1871 with the title, "The Truth About the Cattle Trail." This letter intended to counter an earlier Park City letter saying, "We are informed that the cattle trail has been permanently located through Park City," inferring that Wichita was closed to cattle. Meade wrote, "This is not true. The cattle trail has not been changed from Wichita to Park City or to any other point." Meade, A noted Kansas pioneer and fur trader, first in Towanda, then later Wichita, was a state legislator and a respected business leader. He wrote of Park City saying, "A dozen frame houses scattered over a half section of land and containing 2 or 3 groceries does not constitute the most promising town in the Southwest."
The trail was saved. Wichita and the trail were saved.
But then Park City competed with Wichita for the location of a rail line. Wichita was successful in getting $200,000 in county-issued bonds approved by voters to get a rail line built to Wichita. Park City once again missed out. Wickert's research concludes Park City leaders lacked the organizational skills to get what they wanted.
To get the railroad, to get the cattle trail, to get the county seat, to get the land office, to get any of these things. They just did not have it. Wichita just proved to be better.
Yeah, there's not a whole lot.
One other building said to have come from Park City is on the farm of Richard Basore. Basore farms a few miles west of the Park City site. He says his father moved the building here.
Near as I can tell, it's an authentic piece of the old original Park City.
The wood over here, the long beam.
Yes. The post and beam looks to be appropriate for the time period. And like he said, yeah, maybe you deconstruct it down to the posts and beams and then reconstruct that and refurbish over the top of,
This shed hasn't aged as well as the former dram shop building in the town of Sedgwick. Basore, Stahl, and Wickert visit the former Park City town site. And with the only known photo in hand, they try to imagine it still being here.
Well, it's hard when you don't have anything left that was still there that you could kind of decide. And the trees are, like we were talking, in 1870 were not very big.
Perhaps instead of Park City being a major city, it could have been a farm community serving the area. But instead,
the town leaders at Park City just said, we're out, we're done.
Indications are the town vanished quickly. J.A. McIlvaine, one of the town's platters, wrote a Park City account in the Wichita Eagle edition of February 21, 1884. McIlvaine wrote that Park City, once a rival of Wichita for the county seat, but long since defunct. He also wrote, "At one time, we thought our little town would be the future mistress of the Great Valley, with its millions of people and wealth. But I guess it never reached above 40 houses, all of which, with their owners, have departed from the once favored spot." Park City's post office is listed with other town post office closings here in April of 1876. So in the settling of Kansas, there were winners and losers. Park City's founders had big dreams, but couldn't make them come true. Kingman County has its share of ghost towns. Many of those no longer leave a trace of their existence. But Waterloo in the eastern part of the county remains, if but a shadow of what it once was. The faded February 27, 1885 edition of the Kingman Courier describes Waterloo as a thriving town. It states Waterloo has a hotel, 3 general merchandise stores, a blacksmith, wagon shop, and a post office established in 1881, then closed in 1912.
Waterloo is just a little German settlement. It's got a lot of farmers, a lot of people who invested time and effort into building up the town of Waterloo.
Irene Bergkamp with the Kingman County Historical Museum made a collection of Waterloo photos with captions. These photos are more than 2 decades after the earliest pioneers arrived here. This photo shows a half-dozen musicians making music in front of the Burns Place store, where a shopper could purchase shoes, eyeglasses, and more. Those businesses are long gone. What remains are a few homes and the St. Louis Catholic Church, established in 1881. A congregation still meets here with the church serving the area. Next to the church is the St. Louis School. Most pioneering settlers to Kansas in the 1870s and 1880s didn't have much to prepare them for what they were to see and experience. So when John W. Riggs and his wife Sarah arrived to this part of Kingman County in 1887, there was shock.
Well, when they arrived here, being from Indiana, my great-grandfather took one look around and he said, "Oh, I can't do this." It was a sea of nothing but grass.
And that sea of nothing but grass led to what eventually Waterloo is best known for, the Riggs Arboretum.
It started like any other town, but as I always say, every town has its individual story, and Waterloo's story is the Arboretum.
Judy Riggs Klubine inherited the Arboretum and is the fourth Riggs generation working to keep it open for future generations to enjoy.
And there are people still who bring their children here and take a walk through because they grew up here. I might be the custodian, but they view themselves as being the owner. This is where they grew up. This is their home stomping grounds.
Her great-grandfather, John Riggs, was a school teacher in Waterloo, but his disappointment with the lack of trees in Kansas got Riggs interested in botanical pursuits also. That lack of trees was almost too much to bear for many early settlers.
In fact, people from here would take their horse and buggy and go 9 miles one direction to sit underneath the one cottonwood tree that existed. And on Sundays after church, that's where they would all go as a town and sit down and have their picnics after church.
Now that was a long ways to go back then, just to find some shade from the hot Kansas sun. J.W. Riggs took it upon himself to change his environment. He saw it his destiny to instill a forest of trees in the midst of what some described as the Great American Desert. His 10-acre arboretum sets this ghost town apart from others.
Hey guys, come back here.
John Riggs, the late grandson of J.W. Riggs, is shown here in 2013, leading students on a field trip through the Arboretum, which was a regular occurrence. The Riggs family loves to educate the children.
And this is the biggest one in Kansas. That's the state champion. It's amazing to watch the little kids. Most of them have never thought of a tree as a living being, and it's a lot of fun to take them through, teach them the history, show them the trees, and show them the parallels between the lives of trees and the lives of humans.
This is one of the state champion trees, or used to be.
Those who walk through here now might take these trees for granted because the Arboretum has been here for more than a century. But that wasn't the case for early Kansas pioneers. The planting of trees was almost as important as the planting of crops for homesteaders for numerous reasons.
These trees were planted in 1887. The inception of this started when my great-grandfather, because he could not take the constant ocean of grass, came out here and decided, okay, I'm going to start bringing in different species and see how they handle the heat, the humidity, the lack of rain, see if they could be acclimated here. And every species that he brought in almost unfailingly grew.
It is reported Riggs planted nearly 10,000 varieties in his many years of work here. Some of those varieties you can see scrolling across the screen. Riggs's pioneering work here amazed government and university botanists who didn't believe at the time these trees were suitable for the Kansas climate.
K-State took notice of this odd individual, I guess would be the way to put it.
But at first, the attention Riggs got wasn't positive.
They thought he was nuts.
Nuts, until K-State sent their expert out to inspect Riggs's work for themselves.
They've actually sent somebody out here from K-State in order to ascertain what he was doing.
K-State found out Riggs was planting and getting to grow non-native trees here. This story in the March 1st, 1901 Kingman Journal reports, The government has decided to establish an experimental forestry station at Waterloo, and Mr. Riggs was appointed superintendent. The object is to determine by practical experiment what kind of trees are best adapted to southern Kansas.
He was a pioneer botanist. He was totally self-taught. He was a teacher, so he had a certain level of acumen to begin with. And it was that inquiring, inquisitive mind of his that led him to believe, I think trees would grow here, and they did. I mean, the evidence is all around you.
And the evidence, she points out, remains in this small forest of trees, and what before was a treeless landscape.
And the big lesson they leave with is, look, for the first time in your lives, understand that trees and humans are very parallel in their lifespans. The tree will outlive you by 300 or 400 years, but you respond to environmental influences just about the same.
But even a small forest, left to itself, can get overgrown. Klubine says the arboretum pathways need clearing because tours ceased during the COVID pandemic.
I'm hoping to get the kids back in here so that all of the work that my mother and father put in here to develop this, all of the volunteers, all of their work counts for something. Because this was the first experimental tree station west of the Mississippi.
Waterloo, like so many Kansas towns of the late 1800s, early 1900s, could thrive for a time. Those towns served the farming area around them. But when the train tracks went to Murdock a few miles south, and modern transportation allowed people to travel and shop elsewhere, towns like Waterloo couldn't compete. But the Riggs Arboretum remains.
So we're really looking forward to getting this back up and running again.
And it makes this fading community stand out amongst the thousands of fading Kansas ghost towns. Several southern Kansas border towns boomed, leading up to the famed Cherokee Strip, Oklahoma land run, only to go bust after the dust settled. And how one ghost town picked up and moved to the railroad when the railroad bypassed their town. Those stories still to come. Often, an examination of old maps can turn up ghost towns. This Sedgwick County map from more than a century ago shows the town of Marshall, just a few miles east of the Kingman County line. Marshall was founded in 1876 on the Nenasko River. Its present-day location would be south of Highway 400 with West Harry Street dividing the town. A few houses are located at the former town site, but back in the 1880s, it is written that this was a busy town with 2 blacksmith shops, a hotel, restaurant, flouring mill, and more. The March 29, 1883 edition of the Wichita Weekly Eagle had this story about Marshall, 25 miles due west of Wichita. The story states, Marshall, which at first was a post office, afterwards a trading post, is feeling the influence of its surroundings and is growing to be a town of quite importance. The story goes, Marshall is destined to become, in a short time, an important town, second to none. The story goes, we should not be surprised. Marshall's businessmen are wide awake and those interested in her future harmonious, so that her future is assured. Well, like so many such town stories of the day, the booming hyperbole was greater than the later reality. Andrew Hoffman lives on the former Marshall town site. He was told by others stories about the ghost town. Hoffman says this bridge is from the 1880s town.
And then I started doing some research on it and found out that this is what it was. Marshall, yep.
So here's what happened to Marshall. Folks here were hoping the railroad would come through the town. Instead, the railroad went about 3 miles south to Cheney, which you can see off in the distance from this aerial view. So folks in Marshall decided to pick up their businesses and houses and move to the new town Cheney, established 7 years after Marshall.
It's amazing how many towns are connected to another town because they missed the railroad. It seems like that story is just so common.
Marshall Street, 1 block west of Main in Cheney, is named after the neighboring ghost town. There are many locations in Kansas with historical significance, but which have no visible evidence remaining to be seen by a passerby. Take, for example, this location in the southernmost part of Cowley County, a few miles south of Arkansas City. Back in the 1890s, the town of Cale was located here. Cale happenings were written about in Ark City and Winfield newspapers. This old newspaper clipping says, "A Burt McCoy is going to Cale soon to put in some more new business blocks. Cale," he says, "is booming, and he proposes to make it the best town in the state." Well, that sounds like a typical town promoter back then. Items written about then are similar to today's social media postings, such as "a cat fell into a well in Cale," or "the wheat and oats are looking good," "someone is sick," or "someone is visiting town." One of the stranger Cale newspaper item entries is this. The headline, "Nothing broke, so worse." Back then, if Arkansas Cityans needed a simile for being dead broke, they would say, "not able to buy a town lot in Cale." Evidently, Cale town lots were cheap. The news entry says Cale was started by Winfield capitalists in hopes of killing Arkansas City. It says Cale never died because it never had the breath of life. So when a man is so broke he can't buy a lot in Cale, nothing is broke so worse. The attribution is to the Winfield Courier newspaper. Often the Cale items make reference to the Cherokee Strip. This news clip, for example, says, "The soldiers are occasionally on the trail of boomers and compelling them to return their tracks to the states." Boomers and Sooners illegally entered Oklahoma before the appointed time. There were regular entries of rumors that the land run would come very soon, years before it happened in 1893. The expected Cherokee Strip opening obviously was a regular topic of conversation in Cale and other parts of Cowley County. For example, in the January 29, 1890 Ark City Traveler, the Cale entry says, quote, "Everyone is looking forward to the opening of the Strip." That was more than 3.5 years before the opening. The same could be said of border towns and counties west of Cowley, including Sumner, Harper, and Barber counties.
It just heightened the fever because they knew at some point, they didn't know when, but they knew that the Cherokee outlet was going to open up. And so, the rumors were flying everywhere. You know, when it comes to free or land that was priced extremely low, everybody was interested in making a new start.
The population of Cale swelled to a few thousand just before the Oklahoma Land Run, September 16, 1893. Cale was one of those state-line border towns where pioneers gathered to purchase supplies before the land run. Fences and tree-lined windbreaks remain where once Cale's town streets were. No building structures remain for even the loneliest of ghosts to hide in. Cale declined and faded away like so many southern Kansas border towns did, which were tied to the land run or Texas cattle trade. 62 miles to the west of Cale is where the town of Cameron was located in Harper County. Cameron was right on the Kansas-Oklahoma Territory state line road. Cameron had a rough and tough town reputation because of its location. Nothing remains of the town here, but one can still see where the railroad tracks were serving the town. The railroad made Cameron a cattle shipping point. The Anthony and Harper newspapers wrote about Cameron. This article stated, "The propagators of the new town on the state line south of Anthony have named their youngster Cameron, and at present it bids fair to be quite a healthy hamlet." Cameron's population is said to have been about 300, but once a date was set for the opening of the Cherokee Outlet for the Oklahoma Land Run, the population rapidly increased. Cameron had a land registration office for the land rush, attracting an estimated 10,000 here.
So that these towns like Honeywell, Camchester, Manchester, a lot that they were similar in title, and Cameron before that, kept getting bigger and bigger and more immigrants coming in, and to the point where the government was going to have to do something pretty soon because we have all these people waiting for that land to open up.
A post office opened here June 2nd, 1893. The post office closed 10 years later. It is written Cameron had 3 grocery stores, a lumber yard, drugstore, blacksmith shop, a saloon, and a gambling house. The Anthony Bulletin newspaper wrote of Cameron saying, "The little border town is today an example of enterprise and thrift that cities of greater pretensions do not exhibit." That newspaper wrote of Cameron being laid out as a forerunner of the opening and settlement of the Cherokee Strip. The story boasts of Cameron's steady prosperity over its then 8-year history. But like Cale and other border towns, Cameron's population faded after the land run.
When the land was opened up, you see literally thousands of people crossing over, and these towns were back to whatever their function was earlier.
The town of Manchester was founded across the Oklahoma border to compete with Cameron. The railroad changed the name of its depot here to Camchester, combining both names, not certain which town would survive. This February 1900 story says, Harper County's youngest municipality will change her name. Well, Manchester, Oklahoma survived. Cameron businesses moved across the border, leaving Cameron to become another Kansas ghost town. In Kansas Ghost Towns Parts 1 and 2, we've highlighted nearly 30 noted ghost towns, being careful to find the fading or dead towns which have interesting stories to tell. The Kansas Historical Society tells us there are more than 6,000 Kansas ghost towns. Why so many, you might ask?
When the state was born, towns were created every 10 miles, and that's the distance that people needed to do business with their horse and wagon. Today, we travel 10, 20 miles to go to work. We don't need the corner grocery store in the small town. We might go to Walmart, and that's why these towns die. Highway, cars, just progress, people moving away.
The reasons why there are so many ghost towns are numerous. The advent of modern transportation negated the need for a town every 10 miles or so. Once people could drive greater distances quickly, they could go to the larger communities to shop. Small town merchants couldn't compete and faded away, and then the towns faded also. Farm machinery allowed fewer farmers to do the work that once took many to do. So, often farm children moved to cities for work.
Even in my dad's day, there were farms every quarter mile, and today farms are so much bigger that the populations aren't there to support the school, the grocery, and things close up.
There are numerous other names for ghost towns. Here are a few: dead, abandoned, deserted, vacant, lost, fossil, extinct, relic, former. Wichita State University history professor Jay Price says historians generally prefer to use the term abandoned town. Through the course of the programs, you might have come to your own conclusion of what a ghost town is. The definition of what a ghost town is isn't absolute with everyone.
I categorize them into 3 different categories. You have towns that they were paper towns. They were platted out. Somebody from another state or back east had this idea he was going to make money and have this town, and then it just dissolved with the paper.
Author Dan Fitzgerald borrowed another expert's definition, then added to it for a working definition. He admits while writing 6 books on the subject, he's found opposition to the ghost town label.
That's really important, and it's gotten me into trouble before. I basically use a definition that an old ghost town hunter from California used back in the day, a guy named Lambert Florin, who wrote a series of ghost town books across the West. He basically said a ghost town is a shadowy semblance of its former self. I kind of took it a little bit more than that. I kind of based it on population and businesses. If a town had lost 3/4 of its population, and just about as much in terms of local business, then I would potentially label it as a ghost town and go out and take pictures and decide whether I wanted to put it in the book.
As we've shown you, some former towns are extinct, dead, leaving not even a trace. Others may have building ruins, like Ravenna, with the former courthouse and schoolhouse. There are towns like Adamsville with trees nearly hiding what's left of the dead town. But we've also shown you numerous towns still with a few residents. When you see those aerial views with town blocks nearly empty of houses compared to earlier times, well, it's easier to understand the town is a ghostly shadow of its former self. The number of Kansas ghost towns will increase over the years. Some towns will prosper at the expense of others.
It's sad because these towns were the hopes and dreams of my relatives, of other people's relatives. You know, they came from other countries. They migrated to Kansas, and they established a farm and a grocery store, and their dream was to see their town survive and thrive, their school. And you go through these towns today and they're just broken shells of their former selves. And some people might not think about it, but I don't know, it just pulls a heartstring to go through these towns and know what hard work and dedication it took to create that town.
Some of our ghost towns have few or no residents, but still have attractions which draw visitors. And some Kansas towns turn ghostly after suffering the onslaught of natural disasters. You'll see those as we present more bonus material coming up. The remaining residents of some Kansas ghost towns can blame their town founders for the ghostly fading of their towns. Cases in point can be found along the Cottonwood River in Chase County. It was common for pioneers to settle near rivers and creeks because water is essential. But a legitimate question can be raised about how close to a river is necessary. If you're building a water-powered mill to grind flour in Cedar Point, then yes, it needs to be on the river. But even Cedar Point has some higher land points where Main Street could have been placed rather than next to the river. Cedar Point was founded and got its post office in 1862. The town still has a modern post office serving the area.
Stamps, mailing out packages, mailing out mail, pretty much anything they can get at a regular post office.
The first wood frame mill was built in 1867. It was constructed for sawing lumber, but only a year later it was converted to grind flour. This current stone structure was started in 1871 and completed in 1875 with the name Drinkwater and Shriver Mill. This stone dam was built in 1884, replacing a log dam for the mill's operation. The mill is one of 2 Cedar Point calling cards. Efforts are underway to raise money for its restoration. Mill preservationist Dan Clothier has hopes of the mill being an educational tool so visitors can appreciate how Kansas pioneers used water power to grind flour. But beyond that, the hope is visitors will learn about how Kansas settlers interacted with the water. The mill and the Cottonwood River have long been popular stops for photographers. Another attraction is this Cottonwood River Pratt Truss Bridge. The bridge, located west of town, was built in 1916. The bridge and the mill are listed on the National Register of Historic Places. An historic photo shows stores lining Main Street with folks walking on the sidewalks. Another old photo shows locals using paddle boats on Main Street when the Cottonwood River flooded. Now, those stores are long gone, and with the absence of attention, the buildings are decaying with roofs and walls collapsing. Just think about it. 100 years ago, and even in more recent decades, these storefronts were occupied by merchants. One of them, you can read the writing on the window. It still barely says hardware. Other stores, who knows what they sold in there, because age has caught up with the buildings. The ceilings have collapsed in, and it's hard to tell what was here. The same can be said of the school and its auditorium, built in 1937. Cedar Point had a population of 190 in 1920. A century later, the 2020 census lists 22 residents. The school's gymnasium was modern in its day, hosting basketball tournaments with other Chase County towns competing here. But Cedar Point's enrollment couldn't be maintained. The high school was the first to consolidate in the early 1960s. The sound of grade school-aged children could still be heard on the playground equipment here for several more years. But the K through 8th grades eventually met the same fate as the high school and consolidated in the late 1970s. After the schools closed, the gym continued being used for community functions, including weddings, funerals, and reunions until recent years. Cedar Point still has a mayor-council form of government. They meet once a month here in the City Hall, serving the 22 remaining residents. But time and nature continue taking a toll on the vacant houses around town. There was a time when the train stopped just down the road at the Cedar Point Depot. But those days are long gone, and the train speeds on by Cedar Point, leaving it as a fading Kansas ghost town. Six miles northeast of Cedar Point is Clements. Clements is also next to the Cottonwood River. Only a handful of houses remain here. This building was the former Clements Post Office and General Store. It was recently listed for sale with the original flooring and tin ceiling. Historic photos show a time when Clements had merchants on Main Street with customers coming and going in horse-driven buggies. But Clements, too, suffered from flooding, and even though the town had a rail stop, it faded away. As the newspaper headline states, Florence, Cedar Point, and Clements are centers of flood ruin. The constant flooding of the Cottonwood River took a toll on these towns. This was originally a rail community named Crawfordsville. In 1884, it was renamed Clements. The post office here was closed in 1988. Clements does have its historic Stone Arch Bridge, which is an attraction for visitors. This bridge across the Cottonwood River was built in 1886 at a cost of $12,000 to the county. The stone came from a quarry in Clements. The bridge rises 40 feet above the river and is 175 feet in length. This was built when Chase County was booming. Chase County had more than 6,000 people in 1880 compared to only 2,572 in 2020. Pam McCullough lives near the bridge, and with her husband, they are among the few remaining in Clements.
They had a school here, a bank, and a general store, which the general store is still standing with the historic tin on the building. And they had a post office here. And so it did wash away for the last time in 1951, and that's when everybody gave up, and only a few people live here now.
But the Stone Arch Bridge remains. McCullough says it regularly attracts tourists. The bridge was added to the National Register of Historic Places in 1976. A few years later, a modern and wider bridge was built to serve traffic more safely. That leaves this bridge to receive pedestrians to enjoy some beautiful Flint Hills scenery in Chase County. Now, another 8 miles northeast, and you find the town of Elmdale along Highway 50. The Burlington Northern Santa Fe Railway passes by here, but no longer stops. Elmdale has a post office open 2 hours daily. And Elmdale's Main Street has buildings as a reminder of times when there was a larger population to serve. At its peak, Elmdale had a population of 253 in 1910. 40 residents were counted in the 2020 census. The stone schoolhouse was built in 1895. The Elmdale Cougars won the Kansas State High School Class B baseball championship in 1961. But only 6 years later, the high school closed in 1967. Not long after, the grade school also closed. Historic photos show a main street with merchants on both sides of the street. The absence of automobiles in the photos likely indicates the late 1890s or early 1900s era. Utility poles and lines indicate electric and telephone service. But as with other towns along the Cottonwood River, flooding has always been an issue here. As in Clements, so the Great Flood of 1951 was more than most in Elmdale could bear. This marker in the middle of town shows where the flood of 51 crested on that July 11th day, setting a new record. It devastated this community. The same limestone monument has a plaque for the Jeffrey Brothers Mercantile Store. It was built in 1872 on this site. The store served Elmdale until closing in 1961. The Marion Reservoir, completed in 1968, may prevent a repeat of the great 1951 flood, but the Cottonwood can still get out of its banks, flooding these Chase County towns. Even without flooding, these towns may have faded away anyway. What little manufacturing towns like Cedar Point had closed many years ago. The population of Chase County has been declining since 1900, leaving more Kansas ghost towns in this area than we can reasonably get to. In this bonus portion of our program, I revisit some of the ghost towns featured in our first Kansas Ghost Towns documentary. I visited a dozen Kansas ghost town sites. Some still have paved brick streets and a few ghostly-looking Main Street buildings, like Elgin in southeast Kansas. The Chautauqua County town Elgin has the motto, "Too tough to die." It isn't dead, but the town is certainly fading. The town cafe that held on for so long closed several years ago. No other businesses can be found here.
We've had our share of shootings.
At one time, these wide, now brick streets, were occupied by cowboys bringing some of the last Texas cattle trades to Kansas. That's because when all the other Kansas cow towns, including Dodge City, no longer could host the cattle drives, Elgin could. Elgin sits right on the Kansas-Oklahoma border. So in the 1890s, the Santa Fe Railroad put tracks into Elgin and built a stockyards. Cattle could be brought into Elgin without crossing any Kansas fenced-off farm fields. But Elgin had to find a way around a Kansas law banning Texas cattle coming into the state because of a quarantine. Texas cattle carried ticks, resulting in what was called Texas fever, which sickened other cattle coming in contact with those ticks. That cattle trade helped Elgin to prosper in the 1890s, but it also turned Elgin into a cowboy hell-raising town with 13 saloons catering to their thirsts.
It wasn't anything for a person to, every day, for at least one person to be shot or stabbed in this town.
The outlaws stirred up trouble here and then rode back across the state line into Oklahoma territory to avoid local arrests. The cattle trade here eventually ended, with rails reaching into Texas. Elgin, over the decades, slowly faded. Another town's demise featured in Kansas Ghost Towns Part 1 was Quicker. This farm field in Harper County no longer bears the markings that the town of Runnymede was laid out here between 1888 and 1892. Runnymede was a town of British immigrants coming here to learn about becoming farmers and ranchers. But those Brits, with their parents' monetary support, liked to party and play more than studying agriculture. The Runnymede Boys, as they were called, were wannabe cowboys. They dressed up in fancy Western clothing with sidearms and knives prominently displayed in portraits that they sent back to England to show off. But the party soon ended. Runnymede's founder, Ned Turnley, counted on the Wichita to Harper Railroad being built right through Runnymede. But when the tracks were built a couple of miles south of town, well, Turnley pulled the plug on the town and it vanished about as quickly as it formed. Now, folks in Neosho Falls once harnessed the power of the Neosho River to power mills and generate electricity. Neosho Falls has the distinction of being the first Kansas community to host the president. Rutherford B. Hayes came to a 4-county fair here, drawing thousands of people back then. The town once had a busy main street with several businesses serving a population of 763 in 1900. Now, the Back Road Inn is the only Main Street business in the town of 134 residents. Neosho Falls was once the Woodson County seat, but lost that to Yates Center. The town was already losing residents when the Great Flood of 1951 devastated the city, forcing many to move.
51 just wiped it out, that's all it is to it.
Another town we featured, Castleton, has the notoriety of being a Hollywood movie set in 1951. But Castleton is an example of a town that faded as modern transportation made it easier for folks to shop and trade in larger cities rather than with local merchants. There is much more to learn and experience about the rise and fall of Kansas communities in Kansas Ghost Towns Part 1 than can be told here, making that program also worthy of your attention. Our expanded version of Kansas Ghost Towns Part 2 with bonus stories will reach its conclusion coming up with insight into some of the struggles Kansas pioneers endured in settling the state. After the Civil War, Kansas became a destination for pioneer settlers wanting to start a fresh new life. Those pioneers didn't just come from eastern, southern, and Midwest states. At the time, the United States was embracing immigration because there was a push to move the country westward to settle the wide open spaces. A big motivator enticing people to come out west was the passage of the Homestead Act. President Abraham Lincoln signed the Homestead Act into law May 20th, 1862. Under its provisions, settlers could claim 160 acres of public lands. They paid a $10 filing fee. Then, if they lived on the land 5 years, building a house and growing crops, the land was theirs. There was also a $1.25 an acre payment option. The Homestead Act was a carrot on a stick that thousands of settlers were willing to face hardships to chase after. Besides that, railroad companies were granted federal lands as a payment incentive to build the rails westward to also spur development. The railroad sold the land to settlers and also started new towns.
And if you could somehow get a railroad, that was extremely important because you were tied to the outside world, and farmers would bring in their crops or their cattle to be shipped to wherever the shipping point was at that point, which could be Kansas City, could be Chicago, a number of other larger cities. Without that railroad, they had no reason to go to a town to transact business.
All of that spurred town development in Kansas. Town companies formed with the idea of developing communities and making a lot of money by selling lots. But those towns needed settlers. Some town companies sent their own salesmen to Europe to promote their Kansas towns. Often, in the spirit of booming their towns, they had advertisement brochures that made Kansas to appear as a paradise. That bait enticed people to come. But as we've shown in both Kansas Ghost Towns Parts 1 and 2, those town promoters couldn't deliver on all their promises. So, often Kansas towns got formed with the idea of becoming the next Wichita, with the county seat of government, one or more railroads serving the town, and industries lining up to build there. But more often than not, none of those things occurred. Homesteaders faced great hardships. There were droughts, insects destroying crops, and economic cycles that forced many to give up and go back east or starve. Tom Reed lives near the Ravenna Ghost Town site. As we come to the end of Kansas Ghost Towns Part 2 with this bonus material, Reed talks and sings about what some call the Elegant Plan. It involved Kansas homesteaders and their dreams, which didn't always come true. The song is The Lane County Bachelor. This is Chris Frank. Thanks for watching.
Yeah, the government was promising them, if they couldn't make it, they'd send them out commodities and stuff, which they did. Like that old song that was written right up here just north of here, 15 mile on the Lane and Ness county line, and they called it the Lane County Bachelor. He was coming out here on the Elegant Plan, and the song was, Frank Baker's my name and a bachelor I am. You'll find me out west on the elegant plan. You'll find me out west in the county of Lane, a-starving to death on a government claim. My house, it is made of the natural sod. My walls are erected according to God. The roof has no pitch, it's just simple and plain, and you always get wet if it happens to rain. Hurrah for Lane County, the land of the free, the home of the grasshoppers, bedbugs, and fleas. I'll tell of its riches, I'll tell of its fame, while starving to death on a government claim.
This program is made possible in part by Humanities Kansas, whose mission is to connect communities with history, traditions, and ideas to strengthen civic life. And by viewers like you. Thank you for your support.